Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we are talking about the Nintendo announcements you aren't expecting in the next Direct. So of course there is going to be another Nintendo Direct. I don't know if it's going to be happening this month of August, possibly, but I would say more likely in September because usually there's a big Nintendo Direct in September. Usually it's not guaranteed, but most of the time that's when it happens. And there's definitely a need for a big Direct really soon. We don't really know much at all about the Ocarina of Time remake. We don't really know much at all about the Dust Bloods. We should get more information about Nintendo Switch Sports Resort, and perhaps Nintendo will want to give us just a little bit more info for Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave right before it comes out. I think that all makes sense. There may be other Switch 2 editions that could be announced relatively soon. That also makes sense, and then I'm not even talking about all the third-party things, and there's always a whole bunch of third-party things. Maybe we'll get some footage for Monster Hunter Wilds and a date for when that will be releasing on Switch 2, for example. There's a variety of different things that could happen along those lines. But from a first-party perspective, the biggest deal about the next Direct would be announcing what's to come next, not just giving us updates on things we already know about, because Nintendo can just do game-specific Directs for these different things. We could get a Switch Sports Direct or a Switch Sports Overview trailer. We could get an Ocarina of Time or Zelda Anniversary Direct. We don't necessarily need a general Direct to give us more information about these games already announced, but within a general Direct, there would likely be a handful of new announcements made to fill up whatever need Nintendo has to close out the holidays and also for the opening of next year until it's time for that other Direct, maybe in February or March. And some of these announcements are perhaps the kind of announcements you might not be expecting, maybe some of you are, but I want to dive further into that and just kind of how Nintendo would be handling this next Direct, because, for example, a lot of people are probably hoping for the next 3D Mario to be announced in this next Direct, and I don't think that's going to be the case, and I'll be explaining that in a moment. But first, let me just ask that if you find yourself enjoying my videos, and if you haven't subscribed already, I would very much appreciate your subscription. So, I've been talking about 3D Mario over the last couple of days, and I'm definitely getting excited for it. I definitely think 3D Mario is going to be one of the biggest things for next year. I thought it could be the big thing for this year, but it was either that or the Ocarina of Time remake, and we're getting the Ocarina of Time remake now, so it seems pretty obvious that 3D Mario would probably be a next year thing. And I don't think Nintendo would announce it in a September Direct, because it is Zelda's 40th anniversary. I do believe Nintendo will be celebrating this in official capacity. There will be several announcements. It will be treated similarly to how Nintendo handled Mario's 40th anniversary. That's what I believe, that's what we've been talking about over the last few weeks. And so with that Zelda focus, especially with the Ocarina of Time remake, Nintendo's going to be prioritizing this stuff, and I just don't think there's going to be much room to showcase the next giant Nintendo title like a 3D Mario, especially with a few other things that they are going to want to be talking about. One of those things would be Xenoblade Genesis, and what I find interesting about Xenoblade Genesis is that this was announced in the June Direct. And this is a game that we've been waiting for a very long time, Project Legacy. We know that's what it is because it was leaked by the trailer itself. We saw it there at the bottom of the screen, accidentally it was put out there. And this is the next Xenoblade game, it's a big deal. But I'm actually left thinking it's going to be coming out sooner than what some might be thinking. I've mentioned recently how it's quite interesting that Nintendo actually made sure to put out every single Xenoblade game out as a Switch 2 edition this year. Xenoblade X, then Xenoblade 1, then Xenoblade 2, and Xenoblade 3 in December. And to me, that kind of signals that they want to get all these out this year so they can focus on Xenoblade Genesis next year, and with it having been announced in the June Direct, I'm not saying it's going to have come out by the time we get the next Direct, but I think by the time we get the next Direct, we'll be getting like close to that final trailer. So I am left thinking that Xenoblade Genesis is going to be a first half of 2027 release, and so in this next big Direct, we're probably going to get another update on this game, and we'll be given a release window of perhaps spring, for example. But going back to Zelda, I do think we're going to be getting multiple announcements, as I mentioned earlier. It's not just going to be the Ocarina of Time remake, it's not just going to be the movie, but the movie is coming out April next year, and Nintendo's going to want to keep up the Zelda promotion, the Zelda hype, and we look at how Nintendo handled Mario. There are multiple Mario releases over the holidays of 2025 and the early part of 2026. I'm under the impression Nintendo's going to try and do something similar. Now, Mario's bigger, Mario has branched off to so many different various spin-offs and things. I don't think Nintendo's going to do things exactly the same, but I am anticipating that we'll probably be getting a new 2D Zelda sometime next year. What kind of 2D Zelda? There's a few possibilities there, but if it's something like a Triforce Heroes or a Four Swords Adventures, I could easily see that being announced in this upcoming, we presume, a September Direct, alongside more footage of the Ocarina of Time remake, because those things would be so different from each other. I don't think they would take away from each other, and we could get a Zelda release like that early on into 2027, surrounding the release of the Zelda movie. Now, if it's a 2D Zelda that is less multiplayer-centric and more of like just the next big single-player 2D adventure, they may want to wait until after the Zelda movie for that to come out, and they may not even announce it until sometime next year. So it kind of depends on what Nintendo's doing, and I did consider the possibility that maybe we could see both, but I feel like that's pretty unlikely. It would probably just be one of them, I assume. But you know, there may be other smaller things, like maybe they'll do like a Zelda 99 or some other kind of like smaller NSO release that's Zelda related. That's very conceivable. We've seen Nintendo do that several times. They could very easily do that again, especially for Zelda's 40th anniversary. Another surprise Zelda thing that may show up is something having to do with Twilight Princess. There have been rumors for that. I personally have kind of given up on Twilight Princess, but there are these rumors, and if it were to happen, I feel like what would make sense would just be Twilight Princess from the GameCube on NSO, but maybe Nintendo would want it also available for Switch 1 owners, especially with the Zelda movie coming out and them wanting multiple Zelda releases. Maybe then they kind of just re-release Twilight Princess HD, adapted for Switch 1 and upscaled slightly for Switch 2. I'm fairly skeptical of this because we're about to get the Ocarina of Time remake, so I just don't think it makes that much sense. But if it is something that is announced, then that would probably be something that goes against what a lot of us are expecting. But going beyond Zelda, there are a few other things I'm anticipating here. I think there is a pretty good likelihood that the next Metroid title could be announced. Metroid Ravenous was leaked. Now, there are some rumors suggesting it won't be coming out until the second half of 2027, and if that's the case, they may not be announcing it here. But also, there's talk of a Super Metroid remake. It hasn't been released yet, but there's been speculation by myself, and I'm assuming others as well, about maybe a shadow drop of this pixel-based Super Metroid remake that we've heard about, but maybe Nintendo's saving it for next year. Or even if it's not, if it is going to be said shadow dropped, it would be shadow dropped during a Nintendo Direct. So I wouldn't be surprised if the next Direct has something Metroid in there, of the 2D variety, but yes, something along those lines. Now, we did recently have a conversation about maybe a Metroid Prime 4 DLC being in development. If there is a Metroid Prime 4 DLC being in development, I would assume it would be announced in the next Nintendo Direct, and if it's not, at that point I feel like it's been too long since the release of Metroid Prime 4 for it to really make sense for Nintendo to save an announcement like this. Like, if we get into 2027 and there's no announcement of Metroid Prime 4 DLC, I think the window has passed. It'd be one thing if Metroid Prime 4 had long legs, but it doesn't. I'd be very surprised if it would be very out of the ordinary for Nintendo, but for a game that hasn't even been out for an entire year yet, I still think there's that possibility, and if we have seen some job listings that do seem to be suggesting that there might be some DLC work, then an announcement in a September Direct is probably our last good bet for something like that. Something else that occurs to me that we've been waiting actually a unusually long time for is the next Kirby release. Kirby usually has frequent releases, at least one Kirby title per year it seems like, but in recent years, that hasn't really been the case. It's actually a little bit perplexing. And I believe the main reason why we haven't been seeing that much Kirby lately is because after the success of Kirby and the Forgotten Land, the most successful Kirby game to date by far, they may have realized that they should just focus more on making these more ambitious Kirby releases of the 3D variety, which is exciting to think about, that they're probably all hands on deck, or many hands on deck, hard at work, getting the next big Kirby game ready, and perhaps the Forgotten Land sequel may not be that far off. I'd be a little surprised to see it announced in this next Direct to come out early next year. Of course, if it does happen, I'd welcome it. But what I am saying here is I do think it's about time for us to get something Kirby, and maybe that's what it is, the Forgotten Land sequel. Although I'm kind of left thinking with how ambitious that would be, it would probably take a little bit longer, which is why I'm not really trying to argue that that's the thing we're gonna see here. But something Kirby, and that something Kirby could be something else, like maybe another 2D Kirby. I'm not saying a new 2D Kirby. There have been rumors from Nate the Hate about a Kirby Planet Robobot remaster or remake. That may be something that Nintendo has been sitting on for some time for that right moment, and perhaps that right moment would be to fill up the early part of 2027 and give us something Kirby after we've been experiencing a little bit of a longer break than usual for the series. These are things that I feel many people are not thinking about when it comes to this next big direct. Of course, we're going to see the big thing, that being the Ocarina of Time remake, and maybe even that first trailer for the live-action Zelda movie. But there's going to be more. There's going to be some of these other little things that Nintendo's going to want to put out there to fill out the lineup. Another one that I haven't mentioned, a Pikmin 4 Switch 2 edition that hasn't been announced yet. Would that be announced to come out sometime this year or sometime early next year? I think there's a strong possibility. But what do you all think? What sorts of announcements that perhaps many aren't expecting but you're thinking could be in the next direct? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.